Welcome to the Unknown Webcast. As I did a test run a few days ago with today's guest, I happened to mention that I am so conservative, you guessed it, that I can't turn left even when I'm driving. A word of warning for folks who are joining us: this is not a safe place for those who may be easily offended by having their ideas challenged. This is broadcast number 86, and this week we'll have Dr. Jay Smith to talk about an historical critique of Islam's beginnings. My name is Don Vino, and I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here's Ronnie Boy.
Greetings from sunny Florida, where once again the palm tree came out, saw his shadow, and so we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsors for this program include the Coexist Boutique, for when you care enough to take your hands off your loved ones' throats in order to pick out the perfect gift. The Coexist Boutique. And the Designer Jesus collection. No longer do you need to be embarrassed by your church's Jesus. Just attend the Designer Jesus collection and pick out your own stylish Jesus. And to ensure continued access to this program, please go to midwestoutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led if you want to keep us going, or if you just find us very annoying and want to inflict us upon your friends. midwestoutreach.org, the yellow donate button, contribute as you feel led. And back to Don.
And there are those who do feel like we are quite annoying, both in print as well as verbally, and especially visually. I definitely have a face for radio. And our guest will be joining us in a minute or two, a few minutes. We just spoke with him. He's running just a tad late. I think that Florida weather does it to him, makes everyone late. Is that what's going on there?
Well, oh yeah. What part of Florida is he in?
I don't know. He told me, but I forgot. So.
Oh, okay.
Because it wasn't relevant to my life at the moment.
I'm on the Gulf Coast. Well, at least our county is on the Gulf Coast. It's been very nice and temperate, down to the 60s at night, so we aren't complaining, or at least I'm not. So we're going to talk about the origins of Islam, and I think, a lot of people don't realize that Islam did not come along until a few hundred years after the end of the New Testament. After Christ, Muhammad was not born until the 6th century, I believe. And
which would be the 500s for those who have trouble adding all those things together.
Yes. So you're kind of getting into the early Middle Ages in terms of the pattern or the schema, or whatever, the general outline of history, ancient history, the classical period for Greece and Rome in Western civilization is pretty much over by the year 500. You had the completion of the fall of the Roman Empire, at least in the West, the western half of it, where Rome was. So most people think, well, when Rome finally fell for the last time, when it was finally invaded, captured, and that was AD 476 when that happened. So 24 years later is kind of a convenient stop, cutoff place. Some historians will date it right on the year that Rome was captured. That would mean the Middle Ages started in AD 476. I like the year 500. It's easy to remember. And then you've got from 500 to 1500 is the medieval period, or the Middle Ages. That's easy to remember too. 1500 is a good stopping point because just a few years earlier, you had Columbus discovering America. Just a few years after that, you have the beginning of the Reformation. So that's when the modern period, the early modern period, begins in the year 1500. So that period, 500 to 1500, is the Middle Ages, and it's at the beginning of that period that Islam is born. So you can think of Islam as a medieval religion, a religion that starts at the beginning of the Middle Ages.
Okay.
Yep.
Middle Ages. And, obviously this is a big issue around the world right now. Here we go. So, Dr. J. Smith is with us. Can you hear us?
Welcome.
Can you hear me?
We
can
can.
hear you.
We can
Okay.
see you. We can hear you. And we've been filling in the blanks. Ron has been advising our viewers, live and potential viewers, that Islam is sort of a medieval religion, sprang up in the 6th century.
Early Middle Ages.
Or at least Muhammad supposedly was born in the 6th century. And of course, most Americans' familiarity with Islam came about around 2001.
Yeah, right. Well, but the reason I point this out is because, in terms of religions, when you compare it to Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, any of them, I can't. Maybe I'm missing one, but Islam's a pretty Johnny-come-lately religion. Go ahead.
Yeah, and it gets even worse than that. Who am I talking to here? Who's this?
This is Ron Hensel, a senior researcher, a resident smart guy. He's the one who actually has some degrees. I just usually get the 3rd degree, but
okay. Hi, Rob. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Listen, good to be talking to you guys and gals who's all out there. But you're right, Rob. I think that it is Rob, right?
Ron.
Okay.
Ron.
Okay, yes. Ron, you are right, Ron. It is a Johnny-come-lately, but it gets even worse than that. It's not only a Johnny-come-lately, it does not have any historical or very little historical backing to even support the claims it makes. And that's what we're going to do. I think we're going to unpack that now as we go through this hour.
We are. Just kind of a general overview, let's say, from someone who spends some time talking with Muslims. There's this general idea coming from the Islamic community that Muhammad was raised up to correct the error of Judaism and Christianity. In other words, they had the gospel originally, they lost it, or it was a gospel for their area, and Muhammad is the final prophet to basically restore all of God's truth. Now, what's wrong with that?
You want to take that one on board, just that one phrase. It has come to correct. It has come to upgrade, you might say. It's the newest upgrade. The problem with that is the Quran itself doesn't make that claim. Here I have the Quran right here, and you can see right through the Quran. I've been studying this for 35 years now. Right through the Quran, you have reference after reference. Let me just give you some off the top of my head. Surah 10, Ayah 94. That's chapter 10, verse 94. Chapter 21, verse 7. Both say that if you Muslims have any questions, go to the previous scripture, that's the Tawrat, which is the Torah, and the Injil, which is the gospel, to basically to have your questions answered. Why would they go back to a previous scripture that need to be upgraded, that was supposedly corrupted? And why is it telling them to do that if it was corrupted?
That's a good point.
Chapter 4, verse 136. It says, O Muslims, I have given to you those scriptures that I have given to you. This is Allah speaking to the Muslims. I have given to you the Tawrat and the Injil. So there's a clear reference that the Tawrat and the Injil are for Muslims. Chapter 29, verse 26. It says very clearly, do not argue with the Christians and the Jews. They're not even to argue with us on this point, because they have been given, that's us, we have been given the Torah and the Injils as signs for Muslims. And then chapter 5, verse 46 and 47 and verse 68 says very clearly, O Christians and Jews, people of the book, Al-Kitab, that's us, go back to those scriptures God has given you, for they are signs for you. And he who does not measure by those scriptures is displeasing to God. So there you can see reference. I've given you now 5 references. In every case, it tells them to come to us when they have questions, not to argue with us, that God gave both scriptures to the Muslims, and that we Christians are to guide and to be guided by our scriptures. Interestingly, it doesn't say by the Quran. We Christians are to be guided by our own scriptures. Now, there's not one verse, and I've asked this for 35 years, there's not one verse in the Quran that says our Bible has been corrupted or needs to be upgraded or has been accreted or deleted or somehow has been changed. That does not exist. There is one verse I could go to that they do come back on, and that's Surah 2, Ayah 79. We can talk about that later, but that's the closest they can get.
What does it say?
In chapter 2, verse 79, it says, beware of those, and it's talking about Jews. There's the context. Beware of those Jews who write with their own hands and call it the book. That's the closest you're going to get in the Quran to a corruption of scripture.
What does that mean?
Well, you need to go to the verse that precedes it. And this
Okay.
is what Muslims don't do. And this is what Christians don't do because we don't know the Quran well enough.
In other words, context, right?
Always read the context.
Always read the context.
And the verse before it, verse 78, says, "O Muslims, beware of those Jews." It doesn't say Jews there, but the whole context of the chapter is about the Jew. Beware of them. Who? The Jews that you see in the previous verses. They know not the book. That means they don't know scripture. They but guess. So they don't know scripture. They but guess. Verse 79 follows it. Beware of those Jews who write with their own hands and call it the book. Now, what's that referring to?
Right.
That's not talking about the Quran. That's talking about the apocryphal writings. That's the Talmud, the Mishnah. Now, here's where it really gets exciting, and this is where you can really take on Muslims. All right? If that's talking about the Mishnah and the Talmud, let's look at the Quran now. Look at chapter 5, verse 31 and 32. Verse 35, story of Cain and Abel. Cain kills his brother Abel, doesn't know what to do with the dead body, so he sees a raven scratching in the ground, burying its partner, so he follows the example of the raven and buries his brother the same way. That's not in our Bible. Where does that come from? That comes from the Targum of Jonathan ben Uzziah, written in the 2nd century, an apocryphal account. It doesn't belong in our Bible because it never really happened. And yet it's found in Surah 5, Ayah 31. The very next verse, verse 32, that all our politicians love to quote, "O children of Israel, for he who takes the blood of one as if he takes the blood of all, but he who saves the blood of one as if he saves the blood of all," is referring to the blood of Abel, who has just been taken by Cain. That verse does not belong in the Targum of Jonathan ben Uzziah. That comes from the Bar Sanhedrin, written in the 5th century. We have the original text. We can look at it. We can see that it was a margin comment written by a scribe just thinking out loud about the blood of Abel. Then in the late 5th century, it was incorporated into chapter 4, verse 5 of the Bar Sanhedrin as an analogy of the blood of Abel. But both those verses are from apocryphal accounts. They should not be in the Quran if it's from God. And here you have them in the Quran. And then verse 33, the one that follows after it, is the one that has to do with us, because verse 32 has nothing to do with Muslims or Christians or Jews. It has only to do, it only has to do with Jews. As it says at the top of the verse, "O children of Israel."
Okay. Now,
Now, can you see what I've just done? Can you see what I've just done? I've just taken the verse in chapter 2, verse 78 and 79, and I've read it as it is, and then I've applied it by looking at the Quran itself and showing that really this is an indictment against the Quran. It's not an indictment against the Bible. It's an indictment against these stories that have been incorporated into the Quran. You find that in chapter 5, verse 31, 5, verse 32, chapter 21, verse 17 to 44, chapter 27, verse 17 to 44, and chapter 21, verse 51 to 71. So you can find it all the way through the Quran, verse after verse, story after story from these Targums, these Jewish apocryphal writings.
do you have your headphones, Andy?
We're getting feedback.
Let me see if I've got one here. Go ahead, keep talking while I look.
This raises a couple of questions. First of all, where do they get it from? If it's not in the Quran, is it in like some of the other Islamic writings that the Christians and the Jews corrupted the Bible?
All of these are Jewish apocryphal writings. We know who wrote them. We know when they were written. We know why they were written.
But how did the Muslims? Okay, I'm getting a lot of feedback. I'm gonna have to wait till you put on your headphones because I can't.
Headphones. I have to. Let me go back to my room. They're in my room, which is downstairs. I'll be back in about 2 minutes.
Okay.
You guys keep talking.
We're going to take a break and talk about what are we going to talk about with our commercial?
Well, we can hear from our first sponsor if you like. Hold on a second. I have to get that up a little early. Got some questions for you. Do you struggle with finding the right wine to bring to pagan goat sacrifices? Do you wonder what to wear to your neighbor's neo-Nazi parties? Do you get anxiety attacks when trying to find the right picket sign to share with your friends from Westboro Baptist Church? Now you can put an end to all the worries that come from trying to fit in with people on opposing sides of the culture wars, because you can find the perfect gift for any ideology at the Coexist Boutique. This week's special deal, in honor of the 50th anniversary of Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution. Relive the days when university students subjected their professors to public shaming sessions for not exhibiting politically correct opinions and behaviors. Oh, wait, that's going on right now in the USA. Yeah. Yes. This week's special deal, Cultural Revolution Eyewear. Genuine, smashed Chinese prescription lenses and frames, formerly owned by PhDs and university administrators who were taken out, publicly shamed and humiliated, their glasses ripped off their faces, thrown on the ground and stomped on, dating back to 1966 to 1976, 99 cents a pair. You can't afford to say no to this deal at the Coexist Boutique for when you care enough to take your hands off your loved ones' throats in order to pick out the perfect gift. The Coexist Boutique. So, a couple of questions I have for Jay. One is, how did the average Muslim, or how did so many Muslims get it in their minds that Christians and Jews have corrupted the Old and New Testaments, or is it just the New Testament? I don't know.
Well, when he gets back with his headset, that'll help. But I have a comment that I was trying to get in a little earlier, because when we read the Qur'an, we clearly do find passages that seem to be friendly toward Christians and Jews. And here he's returning, so I'll kind of re-say this.
Welcome back.
Welcome back. What I was saying, Jay, is that if we, it's my understanding that, let me rephrase this. We find passages in the Quran that seem friendly toward Christians and Jews, and we find passages that are very adversarial toward Christians and Jews. It is my understanding, and we're going to correct some of this in a few minutes as we start looking at the actual history, but it's my understanding that the early Muhammad was trying to be accepted and embraced as a prophet of a monotheistic religion along with Judaism and Christianity, both of which rejected him. And so later Muhammad was quite angry about that, and that's why the passages that are vitriolic against both faiths are there.
Okay. I'm going to have to back up and say something historical here in order to answer that question.
Yes.
Before we even assume that Muhammad had anything to do with the Quran, we have to ask, when was the Quran written?
Perfect. What a way to get into that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to segue, but look, it's inevitable. We're going to have to do this.
Yeah.
And this is probably the Achilles heel of Islam right here. You're heading into it, Don. This is probably which is going to destroy Islam in the years to come. This book here is absolutely sacrosanct for Muslims. They have to not only adhere to this book, this is their foundation, this is their authority, they have to go back to it. The question we're asking as historians is, when was this book compiled? When was it put together? And the answer is very clearly, the earliest manuscripts don't even begin to appear until the 8th century. Now, it's not me saying this, not Dr. J. Smith saying this. This is what we're coming from the Muslim scholars themselves. Dr. Tayal Atakulich is probably the world's leading authority on the Quran. Dr. Ekmen Nisanalu, a second leading authority on the Quran from the Muslim world. They are the ones that have done the study on all the major Quranic manuscripts. That's the Topkapi that's in Istanbul in Turkey. That includes the Samarkand manuscript, which is in Tashkent in Uzbekistan. That includes the Husseini manuscript, which is in Cairo in Egypt. That includes the Ma'il manuscript, which is in the London it's the British Museum, British Library now. That includes the Bibliothèque Nationale's copy of the Quran called the Petropolitanus, and that includes the Sana manuscript, which is in Yemen. In Sana in Yemen. Those are the 6 major manuscripts. They have now been studied for the first time. We now have the books that actually unpack them. And in every case, every one of those 6 earliest manuscripts do not appear until 705, until 720, until 749, until 780, until 800s, and some, according the Husseini, probably the late 9th century. So we're talking about 100 to 200 years after Muhammad.
Well,
That's the first thing we need
but
to say.
Christianity and Judaism have the same issue.
Okay, that's a good point. You're making a good point, Rob, but we don't make the same claims. We don't claim that the Quran is eternal. The Bible is eternal. I don't know of any. I hope you're not saying this is eternal. We would not say it was sent down to one man named, or John, Matthew, Jude, or Luke, or them. They wrote them themselves. We knew they wrote them. We're not claiming that we have the originals. Only Muslims make that claim. There's not a Christian I know that would make that claim.
They claim that the manuscripts, there are original manuscripts. Well, of course, now Muhammad himself was illiterate, right?
The Uthmanic manuscript is what we're talking about. The Uthmanic is the third caliph. He was the one that compiled the Quran in 652. That's what all the traditions say. That's what every Muslim would say, whether they are radical, nominal, or liberal. They would all say that this book was compiled by Uthman in 652 AD. So that's their claim. No Christian would make a claim like that about the Bible.
And you're saying that claim is false.
Absolutely. And I'm going to go even further than that. I'm saying that Muhammad had nothing to do with the Quran.
It's my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, it's my understanding that they claim something even more drastic, and that is that the manuscript supposedly that they have is a direct copy of the manuscript in heaven.
Okay, that's the secondary point, but that is true. Now, there's no way we can disprove or prove that, can we, Don? Right, no. Right. So I'm not even going to get into that discussion. I'm getting into a much more practical discussion, which all of your viewers and all your listeners can get into. And this is what everybody listening can ask. You claim four things. That the Quran, you, the Muslim, claim the Quran is eternal. That's in Surah 85, Ayah 22. That's internal to the Quran. The Quran makes that claim itself in chapter 85, verse 22. You were the ones that claimed that it was sent down to a man named Muhammad between 610 and 632. That's not us making that claim. That's you making that claim. That 22-year period. You're the ones that claimed that it was not written down when Muhammad was living. When he died, there was no Quran written down. That's your claim, not our claim. You're the ones that claim that during the time of Abu Bakr, between 632 and 634, that 2-year period, the first recension, the first copy of the Quran was written down, given to one of the wives of Muhammad named Hafsa. She put it under her bed and left it there for about 18 to 20 years. You're the ones that claim that 20 years later, during the time of Uthman, the third caliph, that at that period, it had to be taken from Hafsa, and it had to be rewritten a second time. And that is this book that we have in our hand right here. That is the Uthmanic recension. They call it the Mus'haf, the Uthmanic Mus'haf. That's the Arabic word for it. Mus'haf means codex. Go ahead, Rob.
Was it copied? Is it supposedly copied word for word, letter for letter? I mean,
absolutely. Now, how do I know this? And where does this claim come from? It comes from Al-Bukhari. Al-Bukhari is a hadith writer. He is Sahih. That means there's no error in what he writes. He was writing in 870. Listen to the date. 870. When did Muhammad die? 632. When did Uthman write the Quran and have it finalized? 652. So you're talking about 240 years later. A guy named Al-Bukhari is the one that tells us how the Quran was put together. And it's in volume number 6, hadith number 509 and 510. Now, I can put this all up on the screen if you want me to. I can show you all this in the Arabic and the English translation, or we can just keep going real quick. Because it's important that Muslims, every Muslim that I talk to, every Muslim that I have debated, any scholar that I have had debates with, they will all claim that because of Al-Bukhari, we now know the Quran was sent down to a man named Muhammad over 22 years, was written in its final form, in its second recension during the time of Uthman, and that the Qurans we have in our hand today are exactly the same that comes from Uthman, exactly the same that was revealed to Muhammad, exactly the same as that which is in heaven on those eternal tablets. That's the claim every Muslim makes. No Christian would make a claim like that about the Bible.
Where do Muslims say that the Uthmanic manuscript is? Where is the physical
Every
manuscript?
Muslim up until 2014, that now has been destroyed by a debate I had with Dr. Shabir Ali in Toronto. And that has over 500,000 people have watched that debate. Since that debate, they no longer can make this claim, because at that debate, I showed every one of the 6 manuscripts. I showed the dates for every one of the manuscripts, and then I showed the variants. There are thousands of variants in all of these manuscripts. None of those 6 manuscripts that I just named That's the Topkapi, the Samarkand, the Husseini, the Ma'il, the Petropolitan, or the Sana. Those are the 6 major manuscripts. None of those are from the 7th century. Not one of them is the same as the other, and not one of them parallels the Quran that we have in our hand today.
So, but until then, though, where were they saying this Uthmanic manuscript was?
The Topkapi, the Samarkand, the Husseini, the Ma'il, Petropolitan, and the Sana.
So
those are their 6.
Oh, okay. So in other words, there was no Uthmanic manuscript, really. They never
all claim to be Uthmanic. Everyone, even today, if you still go on the websites, they still say Uthmanic Musaf, Uthmanic Musaf.
When I'm hearing Uthmanic, I'm hearing the original Uthman manuscript.
Yes.
But
every Muslim has always claimed that until 2014.
But really, in reality, only 6 copies of it, allegedly copies, existed.
No, these are the 6 earliest copies. There are many other copies that come after.
So the
autograph, you have the St. Petersburg copy. You have you have the you have Istanbul copy. You have 2 others that come that are you're from all over the world. There are hundreds of other manuscripts, but they're all much more recent.
Well, let's use the word autograph to distinguish those copies from the original autograph of the Uthmanic manuscript, the one that those copies are based on. They acknowledge that has gone out of existence, right?
The scholars are for the first time now acknowledging it. This is what's great. Now, when I say scholars, Ron, I'm talking about finally Dr. Shabir Ali he did so in 2014 at the debate I had with him. He finally had to accept that this Quran, the one that he is using, the one that every Muslim uses today, was written in 1924. Let me repeat that date. Wow. 1924.
Wow, that's pretty late.
Would you call it then a critical edition based on the 6 manuscripts, or what?
No, still not based on the 6 manuscripts. As I just said about 5 minutes ago, this Quran that I have in my hand is not parallel to those 6 manuscripts. So what's this based on?
What would you say?
Well, what do they claim? They claim that this Quran, called the Hafs, it's known as the Hafs Quran. H-A-F is the man's name. H-A-F-S, sorry, is the man's name. They would say that this Hafs Quran was put together by a group of scholars at Al-Azhar University in Cairo in 1924. That's 94 years ago. They claim that when the scholars put this book together, they did so to canonize it so that there would not be thousands of other variations. They wanted to have one final Quran. Now, isn't that what Uthman was supposed to have done back in 652?
Right.
So why does it take them 1,400 years to do it again?
Well, let's just try to. I'm going to basically compare what you're saying with my knowledge of biblical textual criticism.
Yeah.
And 95% or so of all textual variants amount to spelling, punctuation, things that are, just very trivial. So
don't change any actual teaching.
Right. So we're talking about really less than 5% of textual variants go beyond spelling and punctuation.
And it doesn't change any theology, and it doesn't change any doctrine.
Right.
So in this case, are we talking about, did this 1924, I'll call it a recension, for lack of a better word, did this 1924 recension, how many significant substantive errors did it try to smooth over or eliminate? A lot? Major ones?
Thousands.
Okay, we're talking about more than spelling. I don't even know if ancient Arabic had punctuation.
Dr. Dan Brubaker, who is a colleague of mine, and he is the one whose work I introduced in 2014. So it's been around for 4 years. I introduced in Toronto. He did his doctoral thesis on this very question. Your question. That is, what are we going to do with can we find any human intervention? Can we find any corrections? Just simple corrections to support the fact that maybe this is not from God. Maybe it did not come from Muhammad. Maybe it did come from man, which is a simple supposition to make, which is what we claim about our Bible. Well, yes, we do say it's inspired by God, but God didn't write this. We know who wrote it. Well, John wrote John, Mark wrote Mark, Luke wrote Luke, Matthew wrote Matthew. So you can't compare the Bible and the Quran because we're not making the same claims. I'm going to have to keep reminding you and people who keep on jumping me on that say, well, our Bible's just as bad. Oh, hold on a minute. Of course it's just as bad because we don't even make those claims. What we're hammering here is that this is from God. the Quran is not from God. And what he did in his doctoral thesis, he went around to these 6 major manuscripts and he filmed them, filmed every page, was given access to all of the 6 manuscripts, and he also did another 4. So he actually looked at 10 manuscripts, all of them from the 8th and 9th century. He was hoping to find maybe 1 or 2 corrections, because that would then dispel this notion that it was sent complete, unchanged, to a man named Muhammad, written down, complete and unchanged at the time of Muhammad, and has remained for 1400 years complete and unchanged as that which exists in heaven. He wanted to just dispel that notion. Guess what he found? Over 500 insertions. That means entire words that are inserted, or entire lines that are inserted of the text. Now, when I'm saying inserted, I'm not just talking about diacritical marks. I'm not talking about vowelization. Are you familiar with those 2 words?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, when you, in Arabic, if you know Arabic, Ron, do you know Arabic?
I don't know Arabic, but yeah,
Don,
I know
do you know
diacritical
Arabic?
marks. And
I don't, but you have a similar kind of a thing with Hebrew and God's name, for example. You have markings that others have added in so we can have a consistent pronunciation of them.
Same thing in Arabic. In Arabic, there were no marks. When at the time of the 7th century, we didn't have any diacritical marks. They didn't exist. Arabic was a very crude language. It only had what they call razm. Razm means a consonantal text.
mhm.
These changes that Dr. Dan Brubaker filmed, and they're all up on his site. You can go up now on Quranic Gateway. You can prove me wrong if I lied. He found over 500 insertions. These are razm insertions. These are not diacritical marks. These are not dots above and below the line. Let me give you an example. If you have a smiley face, just a simple smiley face, if you put a dot above it, it's a nun. If you put 2 dots above it, it's a ta. If you put 3 dots above it, it's a tha. If you put a dot below it, it's a beam. If you put 2 dots below it, it's a ya. So it's a nun, ta, tha, beam, ya. It can be 5 different letters depending on where you put the dots. So you have to have dots in order to know what letter you're looking at. Am I correct on that? Now, that didn't exist in the 7th century. Those were only introduced in the late 8th century. So none of these manuscripts that I just named, the 6 major manuscripts that I just named, have dots above and below the line. They don't exist then. So every one of these corrections that he found, these insertions, were put. You can see if I get up on my PowerPoint, I can show you them on right now. But let's just go and imagine they're put above and below the line. But what's fascinating is that when they're inserted above and below the line, they're inserted with dots in them. So the words that are inserted have dots and they have vowelization. There are 3 vowels in Arabic. You have the dhamma, which is the which is the u sound. You have the kasra, which is the e sound, and you have the fatha, which is the a sound. So u, a, and e sound. Okay, those 3 sounds. Those were also invented in the late 8th century, and are not found in any of the earliest manuscripts. So what's fascinating, he found 500 of these insertions. He found 390 erasers, where they've erased words, where they've erased whole lines, where they've erased almost sometimes an entire verse. Then he found coverings, which are covered over. They're pieces of paper that have been covered over entire words, entire sentences. You'd love to pick up and see what they're covering, what they're hiding underneath. Many times he's found 190 coverings with writing over taps. So they've changed the text completely.
Okay, now I want to interrupt just a second and break your thought, just to go back for the viewers to say something that, again, is critical. Just another reminder. Our claim about Scripture is not that everything we have is inspired and inerrant, but that the original autographs, what John wrote, what Mark wrote, what Paul wrote, was inspired and inerrant in the original autographs. However, as you go down through time and you have copyist errors creeping in, we can actually, and this is what Ron was talking about with higher criticism, we can tell when certain things crept in. There were side margins that became part of the text, for example. We know where that occurs, and so we know what is not supposed to be there. The difference here is the claim is that it was dictated verbatim perfectly and continued that way down through time. What you're saying is it's just not true.
None of that's true.
Right.
But
Well,
we're not just saying that. We're proving it by looking at their own manuscripts.
Right.
I've never actually heard a Muslim say when the Quran was committed to writing. I had only heard that it was dictated or recited by Muhammad. I just kind of assumed somebody must have been there taking notes or something.
Ah, that's a good point. There was someone there. His name was Zaid ibn Thabit. He was the
Okay,
secretary of Muhammad.
So somebody took notes, and
Nope.
no, he just sat there and listened,
There you go. What's a secretary supposed to be doing?
taking notes. Well,
Writing them down. What do secretaries do? They write.
So why didn't this one?
Good
do that?
question. Ask your Muslim friend next time.
What will he probably say?
Who knows? They have no idea. And I say, isn't that rather inept to have a secretary? If Muhammad couldn't read or write, here, even back up. Why would God, in his wisdom, who's already given us the Old and New Testament 600 years later, decide to give yet a third revelation in a language that couldn't even accommodate the text? Secondly,
Yeah.
why would he then give it to a man who couldn't read and write? If that's his major function, if that's his major ministry to write this down and preserve this Quran, why did he choose an illiterate man to give the greatest revelation to mankind? Thirdly, this man, Muhammad, had a secretary named Zaid ibn Thabit. What was his job if it wasn't to write down what Muhammad was receiving? Why didn't he write it down? Fourthly, why didn't Abu Bakr, who was the first caliph after Muhammad died, when he was given the authority and given basically the job to have it written down, why didn't he then preserve that copy and send it out to the 9 provinces that Uthman had to do 20 years later? Fifthly, when Uthman finally did write it down and had it written down by Zaid ibn Thabit again 20 years later, and Alas and Zubair and Harith, the 4 of them, had to rewrite it again, and he sent it out to 9 provinces. Let me just name the 9 provinces. That's Basra, Baghdad, Damascus, Jerusalem, Cairo, Alexandria, Aden, Herat, and Nishapur. Those are the 9 provinces that existed. There was one copy went to every one of those 9 provinces. Where are they today? We'd like to have one. If you could just give us one copy. We're only talking 1400 years ago. Listen, you come to London, where I've been living for the last 25 years. I can take you to the British Library, and I can show you the Sinaiticus, which goes back to the 4th century. That's
Right.
300 years earlier. Right next to it is the Alexandrinus, which goes back to the 5th century. That's 200 years earlier.
The Dead Sea Scrolls that go back to 200 BC or so.
But see, the Dead Sea Scrolls were written on papyrus. None of these manuscripts, the Uthmanic recensions, are written on papyrus. They were all written on vellum. Big difference between vellum and papyrus.
And vellum lasts longer in dry conditions. And there are plenty.
All of these are vellum. Every one of these manuscripts, the Topkapi, the Samarkand, the Ma'il, they're all vellum.
Well, and since Saudi Arabia is largely a desert, big desert. There really was no excuse to not have a manuscript from that era preserved.
Saudi Arabia had nothing to do with this. There's nothing happening in Saudi Arabia.
Well, I'm saying, well, you had Mecca and Medina there, right?
Mecca didn't exist at this time.
I'm sorry?
Mecca did not exist at this time.
Mecca did not exist during Muhammad's life?
Oh, you've not heard this yet. I'm sorry.
No, he has not heard this yet.
Okay, there is no reference to Mecca in any documentation at all. This has been well known since 1987. 1987, Dr. Patricia Krone, who is the world's leading scholar on the early Arabic, she is a linguist, she reads and writes 15 languages, was head of department at Oxford University, wrote a book called Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam in 1987, where she questioned this problem, this city called Mecca. She said, listen, we're always talking about the city called Mecca. Look in the Quran and find how many times Mecca is referred to in this book. Once. Okay. In chapter 48, verse 24. Only one time will you even find that word in the book. If it's such an important city, if it's a city where Adam and Eve were thrown down to from the Garden of Eden down to earth, then it should be the earliest city in existence, according to Surah 20, chapter 21, verse 51 to 71. It's where Abraham rebuilt the Kaaba. So certainly in 1900 BC, when Abraham was living, it should have existed. According to all the Islamic accounts, it was the center of trade, north, south, east, and west. So it should have been well known by the 7th century AD. She said, I have looked and I have scoured all of our ancient documents from the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th century. She's looked at every map that existed from that time period and has not found one reference to Mecca up until the 7th century. Guess the date when she finally found the first reference to Mecca.
I can't even begin.
741.
Okay.
When did Muhammad died? 632.
So the reference in the Quran that you mentioned, when would that have happened?
So that means that reference must have come after 741.
Well, we have at least you have reason to believe that it did.
Now, can you see how the documentary evidence is fitting the manuscript evidence? And now we get to the archaeological evidence. Now, I can see Don smiling. He knows where I'm going to go with this. Now, let's go to the archaeology to see if this all fits together. I'm giving you a real crash course, Ron. So, and those who are listening, this will be the first time they've heard it as well. When you look at
and I do want to say, one second, I do want to say, they can go online on YouTube and look for a historical critique of Islam's beginnings, and you'll get an hour and a half maybe of more in-depth. Here's what's going on, boom, 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 boom.
Just go up to Fander Films. We have all of this on Fander Films.
Yep.
How do you spell that?
Fanderfilms. On YouTube, go up to Fander Films. Pfanderfilms. Fander named after Dr. Karl Fander. It's a German spelling, so it's PF for the first 2 letters.
Okay.
That's been up for 12 years, but this material was just put up before Christmas. All of this in 6 different videos before Christmas of 2017. Each one is 1 hour long. It was a video program that I did on Trinity Television, and those are all up there. And this question that we're talking about right now is I unpack it for a whole hour. I'm giving it to you in 5 minutes.
Good.
So where if there was no Mecca, what about Medina?
Well,
Medina.
He's going to give you the history.
I'll give you all of this.
Okay.
When you look at the Quran, and this is Dan Gibson who wrote this book here. This is the book he wrote that just came out last year, in 2017. This unpacks all of it. But he has been an archaeologist who's lived in the Middle East, and for 25 years, from 1987 to 2004. So for 25 years, he has been living amongst the Bedouin, learning their languages, going to every one of these places, because he knew that there was a problem with Mecca. He'd heard about this long before you or I even heard about it. He knew about it long before most scholars knew about it. And he did what a scholar should do. Rather than just reading books in the library, he actually went to every one of these places personally. He went to Jordan, he went to Saudi Arabia, he went to Syria, he went to Yemen, he went to all across North Africa. And for 25 years, he went to mosque after mosque after mosque, went to the earliest mosques that existed, the ones that still exist today that have not been destroyed completely. He went to their, most of them are destroyed, but they're still artifacts. They're still, you can still see the walls for the earliest. You can go down to the, and he looked for the Qibla wall. He was looking for the Qibla wall, which means the direction of prayer. Every mosque is facing a certain direction, and they're all supposedly facing Mecca. Am I correct?
That's
Correct.
right.
In the Quran, it says so very clearly. It says in chapter 2, verse 145 to 149, that the Qibla, the direction of prayer, is from the great mosque to the, has been redirected down to the Musa al-Haram. Haram means the, well, actually is the great mosque. There, the problem is it doesn't even say where it is. Even in chapter 2, it doesn't say the word Mecca. It just says to the great place, to the great mosque. So that's why it's called Al-Aqsa al-Haram. Now, here's the great thing about it. When he went to every one of these mosques, he took the coordinates of where the Qibla was directed. And he was assuming that they would all be directed toward Mecca. They should be, because that's what chapter 2, verse 145. But it doesn't give the name of the city. It just says the place of the prophet. Who is this prophet that it's talking about? They don't give a name of the prophet. He then got curious, and so he went back to the book again, and he looked at all the geographical locations he could find in this book. There are 65 geographical locations in the Qur'an. And he wanted to find out where these geographical locations are. He realized that the Quran was very clear that wherever this prophet was, it was in a valley. It had a parallel valley. It had a stream going through it. It had trees, clay, loam, grass. It had olive trees. That's when the bells started to ring. Olive trees. Now, anybody who knows anything about olive trees knows that olive trees only grow around the Mediterranean. There are no olive trees in Arabia, and certainly not that far south. So he knew immediately there was a problem here. That's why he went to the mosque. Then he noticed that over and over again, 23 times in the Quran, it mentions that this prophet, though it doesn't give him a name, you won't find Muhammad's name in those verses. It just says the prophet, the representative of God, the Nabi Allah, the Rasul Allah. These are the prophets of God over and over again in Arabic. But it mentions 23 times that this prophet has contact with these people from Ad. Ad is the biblical Uz. 24 times that he has contact with people from Thamud. Thamud would be the Nabateans, Nabateans, from Nabatea. 7 times the people from Midian. Well, we know where Ad, and we know where Thamud, and we know where Midian are. Take a look on a map, and you'll see where they're located. They're located all around Jordan, but that's 600 miles further north. So he was very curious. This is why he decided, I got to go to these places and find out what this Quran is talking about, where this place is. When he got to each one of these mosques, he looked at the Qibla direction, and he used what he called ArchNet coordinates, which is not Google Maps, because Google Maps does not take into consideration the curvature of the Earth. So this is the most accurate form of coordinates that is possible to use, created by MIT. He uses ArchNet, and he was able to locate every one of the Qiblas, and guess what he found?
I'm guessing it had something to do with Palestine.
Nothing to do with Palestine.
Okay, then I guess something else.
Nothing to do with Jerusalem. Up until 706. So he found 19 mosques, but every mosque up until 706. Now remember, Muhammad died in 632. The Qibla was canonized in 624, according to the Quran. Okay. And according to every Muslim, they'll tell you. Up until 706. So we're talking a good 60 years later, 70 years later. Every mosque was uniformly pointing to one place. From as far away as Canton in China, from as far away as Cherman in Kerala, South India, from as far away as Jordan and Syria, down in Yemen, every mosque up until 7 and 6 is pointing to one direction, and they're within just a little over a degree off. Guess what that place is?
Well, you know how that went the last time you asked.
Yeah. Ron failed 2 times.
Don, do you know the name?
I don't.
Petra.
Okay, Petra. So there are olive trees near Petra?
There are olive trees in Petra. Take a look at Petra. It has a valley. You've seen pictures of it. It has all those temples and all those
major trade route.
It's exactly. It's at the center of every major trade route. It has a parallel valley. It has clay, loam, tree, grass. It has everything the Quran talks about. And take a look and see where the people from Ad and Thamud and Midian are. They're all around Petra. Everything that you find in this book fits Petra. Exactly fits Petra. Every one of the mosques fits Petra. So when in the world did Mecca come into importance? And when is the first mosque that has been found that finally faces Mecca? Not till 727. That's 100 years after Muhammad.
Wow.
Now, when's the first reference for Mecca that has yet to be found? 741. And when is the first map that we can find with Mecca on it? Not till 900.
How do we account for the change?
You got about an hour?
No. We do, but we're gonna hold on to answer that because we need to hear from our sponsor.
We had an hour. I think we've kind of used quite a bit of it up. All right. Well, we want to ask you some. Well, you know what? I'm going to try to get this thing working. Do you cringe when the Christians you hang out with try to introduce Jesus to your non-Christian friends? Well, you can say goodbye to the days when your church's Jesus was a source of social embarrassment. Now, even your church can keep pace with the latest fashion-forward trends in spirituality. Introducing the Designer Jesus Collection. These amazing new Jesus styles are hitting church runways and the most exclusive Jesus fashion shows at churches near you. You don't want to miss Yoga Jesus, Hipster Jesus, Buddy Jesus, Socialist Jesus, Mormon Jesus, and introducing Muslim Jesus. At Designer Jesus Collection fashion shows, you will find a Jesus you'll be proud to introduce to your most sophisticated, cutting-edge friends and acquaintances. Please observe the attendance requirements. Cost of admission is just your eternal soul. Required attire, semi-formal. All proceeds benefit His Royal Majesty of the Kingdom of Darkness. The Designer Jesus Collection, London, Paris, Rome, New York, Salt Lake City. You don't want to miss it. Okay, so back to the real good stuff here.
Ron, you're going to have to put Petra as in one more city beyond.
You know,
Yeah, we
I
are.
I don't know how many church runways there are in Petra, but I'm sure they can bring one in if they need to. So, I mean, you have all these mosques pointing to Petra, but something happens by 727. Was that the year that you said, where the Boeing jet landed, and because it was 727, and
then it was plain that it was supposed to be.
But when this is a problem you always encounter in biblical criticism and things like that, when somebody makes a claim that something that nobody else saw up until now, and they somebody comes out with what's at that point a new paradigm, a new thesis or whatever, and it involves something like this, that something got changed radically in the tradition that we're talking about. And here you're positing that something changed radically in the Muslim tradition that's nowhere attested in the literature. But you just showed all this evidence, and it's very compelling evidence. So now the question is, how do we account for this change? And you said it's going to take an hour to describe this. Maybe we need to do another program. I don't know.
Okay, Ron, let me stop you right there. Everything I have said up to this point, and now we've almost got an hour. We've gone about 50 minutes, right?
Yep.
Have I said any theory yet?
No.
Have I been speaking like as a Christian?
That's I think you've been speaking as a Christian. I'm assuming.
He is a Christian, but his question is: has he quoted any Christian sources, or has he dealt with Islamic sources and archaeology?
Right. It's all been. Yeah, that's why I say you present a compelling case from the Islamic sources.
Have you noticed, Ron, that I have never said anything about my impression as a Christian? I've never said anything about my my reference point to Christianity. You've been doing that. You've been saying, "Wait a minute, when Christianity?" I've been trying to stop you because who cares about Christianity?
I haven't mentioned Christianity either. I'm talking strictly.
You mentioned the Bible a few times, but in the Bible we have the same problem. No, that's not what I want. I purposely have not gone that direction. Why have I not?
No, I'm not. No, this point I'm bringing up is not Christian. It's neither Christian nor Jew nor Islam. It's strictly historical.
Absolutely.
The question.
I tried to keep this as neutral as possible. Right. That means anybody listening. You don't have to be a Christian. Most of the people that get excited by what I'm saying are atheists.
Okay. Well, I just want to clarify. I'm only asking a historical question. What accounts for the change?
Okay. And this is, I'm making this point very clear because it's important that you hear this. What we're going to do now is we're going to try to make sense of all the evidence. And that's all we have done for 50 minutes is looked at the evidence. We have not yet said what it means. And you can see that's the job of any historian, is to then take the next step. Well, then, with all this evidence, and you say it is strong evidence. We're talking about Qiblas of mosques that you can go to today. You can go and see if Dan Gibson is wrong. Take a look. Don't just read the book. Go and physically to every one of these mosques. Dan Gibson is right now, as we speak, back in Jordan. He's looking at 25 other new mosques that have just been discovered. This is going to be ongoing for years to come. It's not stopped. Almost everything that I have quoted today, I haven't done any of the research on any of it. But it's coming from the best in the world. Patricia Krona, no one is better than her. Who can read and write 15 languages like she can? She just died last year. For the last 10 years, she has been head of department at Princeton University because she got death threats in England for what she discovered. And because of the death threats, she moved across the Atlantic and came here to the United States. Dr. Robert Hoyland, who reads and writes 18 languages. He is the one that's probably done the best work at looking at what existed outside of Islam in the 7th and 8th century and what they said about these Arabs. Now, Now you're asking me to go and make sense of it all. And this is where it becomes dangerous. Because what I'm going to say today, in 1 year, I may have to correct. Now we're going beyond evidence. We're trying to make sense of it. Okay? I want to put that caveat out there. I want all your hearers to hear this so that I won't get in a year. Well, Jay, you said this. Well, no, I may change it in a year because everything
you're
we've got to this
an
point,
opinion based on the evidence that's presented. And the
this is
opinion
my
may
opinion,
change.
and it's only Dr. J. Smith's opinion.
Right.
And I have to be held accountable for it. You're correct. But this is what I think happened. There are others that agree with me, but there are many others who probably won't agree with me, who will come up with their own opinions. The problem is we have to somehow answer Ron's question. And it's a good question, Ron. So how do we make sense of all this? Why is it that everything is so far north? And why is it there's nothing in this place called Mecca? And why is it there's no evidence even for a place called Mecca until 741? This is what I think is going on. Look and see. And well, before we get into what I think is going, let's make one more piece of evidence. Take a look at Islam today. Look how sophisticated it is. All these rules and regulations, Sharia law. Look at the enormous amount. They have rules and regulations for every area of life. How you walk, talk, eat, drink, sleep, you name it. They have rules and regulations. This is a very sophisticated religion. And have you noticed? Most of the rules and regulations fit an urban society, not a rural society. And especially not a nomadic society. It has enormous amount of rules and regulations that are much more social, interlocking gradations of people that live and only would live in urban environments. And when you look at Islam today, it makes no sense in the middle of the desert in Central Arabia, called the Hijaz, for this religion to have been put together and practiced so sophisticated in such an environment. It would not make sense in that. And that's the first question you need to ask. So I suggest the reason for that is that this has nothing to do with the Hijaz. It has nothing to do with the nomadic environment. It has everything to do with a political environment that, if you take a look at everything we do know, fits perfectly with what was happening politically. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, let's start with the first problem. Who is in power at the end of when the four rightly guided caliphs? We don't have reference for any of them. We don't have any reference for Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, or Ali anywhere except for Islamic traditions. And the Islamic traditions don't even begin to get written down until 833. Muhammad died in 632. You have nothing before 833. That's the 9th century. All of the hadith that we've been referring today to tell us how the Quran was written is from the late 9th century. That's 870. Al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Ibn Dawud, Tirmidhi, they all come after 870. The one that writes down the life and the whole how Islam began is named Ibn Hisham. He died in 833. Al-Waqidi, he died in 835. So that's 9th century. So everything that the Muslims are dependent on, everything they're dependent on who Muhammad was, how the Quran was written, was Islam, what was Mecca all about, what was happening, all comes from the 9th and 10th century for what was happening in the 7th century. And I want to stop with that and say, throw out the tradition, let's go to the 7th century. And let's see what was existing. And the first name we come up with from any historical sources is not Muhammad. His name is nowhere in any Arab sources. Have you noticed that?
I haven't been reading Arab sources lately, so no.
So that's why you need to ask.
Right,
ask
and we just assume because the claim is, yes, that he was there. And what you're saying is, maybe, but we have no evidence that he was there.
Can you imagine, now here I'm going to be as a Christian, I'm put on my Christian hat. Can you imagine us talking about Jesus Christ, living in Bethlehem, living in Nazareth, growing up for the last 3 years, doing his ministry, going to Jerusalem, dying on the cross, rising again, appearing to 500 people, and yet we have nothing about him, not one word about him from any Christian sources until the 3rd century?
That would
Matthew,
be a
Mark, Luke,
problem.
and John would have only lived in the 3rd century, that they did not live in the 1st century. None of them knew Jesus Christ. None of them walked with Jesus Christ. None of them ever saw Jesus Christ. They were writing from 240 years later, and they were redacting everything back to what they believed Jesus said, did, and where he went.
Even the most extreme liberal critic from the 19th century didn't push the boundaries that far. They might
Nobody would. And how could we defend him? Now, why haven't we asked Muslims about this? Why has there been nobody who's been critical of this? Why is it that nobody outside of us, a few of us, who are historians, have held Muslims accountable and says, how can you dare say that we're to listen to your narrative? Your narrative only begins in 833. You have nothing earlier than 833. And we have looked at all the archaic literature from the 7th century, and we can't find any Arab source for a man named Muhammad until 691, and he died in 632, and that's on the Dome of the Rock. The first place you will find Muhammad's name in any Arab sources is on the Dome of the Rock in there, Jerusalem, there on that beautiful building that sits up on top of that hill.
Okay, now we are at the end of our hour here, so I'm going to say a couple of things before we wrap up. One, I want you to give the the internet, where people can go and watch at their leisure these 6 or 8 sessions, however many sessions you have. It's a lot of very good material that needs to be digested, thought about, written down, and materials ordered. So I want you to give that. And I also want to ask if you will come back again in the future. We can talk about a date if you're willing to do that.
Sounds like we just scratched the surface here. I mean, I've got this feeling like, boy, it's like we didn't even get to the tip of the iceberg yet.
Ron, and this is the frustration. Almost everything I'm telling you is brand new because no one has dared to talk about this in any seminary, in any Bible school. Whenever I'm asked to come and teach it, I have to fly in, do it quickly, and then get out. And they don't let the Muslims know that I've been on campus because this is very dangerous and it's very confrontational and it's highly controversial. You can lose your life if you say some of this in certain places in the world. That's why not many people want to deal with it. But that's why I'm bending over backwards to say that nothing that I'm saying comes from a Christian position. This is all using hard artifacts, evidence. And what we can do, Don, I'll come back again. And what we need to do is what Ron asked. Let's then unpack it. Let's see what's happening politically. Let's see why this all fits in. It fits in perfectly if you look and see what's happening politically on the ground. What's happening in Damascus? What's happening in Baghdad? What's happening in Yathrib, which is now Medina? These cities did exist. And so did Taif, and so did Tabuk, and so did Khaybar. All these cities are well known. And we have lots of reference to what was happening in those cities. Once you start and see what's happening in those cities, and you see what's happening between the Umayyads and the Abbasids, these two great empires, and how they're confronting the Byzantines in the north and the Sassanids over in the east. Once you start to see what's going politically, suddenly all this fits and makes sense.
It starts making sense, right? And you're doing what we do with other groups. When I talk with Jehovah's Witnesses, I only want to use their material, really. If I talk to Mormons, I want to talk with Mormon material, because then I don't have to worry about making a defense for whose translation is better, who's whatever. Let's just deal with your claims and whether you can prove them or if they fall apart under scrutiny, which is what you're doing here. And I appreciate that. I like that. So
now let me just say, and the last thing I will say, to help Ron out, almost everything I am doing and everything I am saying now, most of the scholars in Europe now are agreeing with what we're saying, but we're not making it. This is coming, all of it's coming from their scholarship. What they're saying though is that they cannot say this publicly. They dare not say it publicly, and they've asked us to do so. The reason they've asked us to do so is because we do not have chairs that we're protecting. We do not have an institution behind our back whose name we have to protect. And we only have one person, and this is where I'll show my Christian credentials. I only have one person I'm responsible to, and that's Jesus Christ.
Right.
How many
he's saying these other scholars are, they're doing research.
How many of these scholars are themselves Muslims?
Two of the ones that I use for all my Atikulich and Ek Miladin, and also Hilani. This book here I was going to introduce today because this is the newest stuff that's just come out since August. And wait till you hear what she has to say. She is a Muslim scholar, and this is on the Sana manuscript. But we haven't even got into the radiocarbon datings of the Sana manuscript. We haven't even looked at the enormous problems with the latest manuscript that's just now been uncovered. And we've not even talked about the 31 different Arabic Qurans that we have found in today's marketplaces. we can find 31 completely different Qurans.
I don't want to extend this program out very much longer, but historically, traditionally, going back centuries, has each mosque tended to have its own copy of the Quran?
No.
Or so how were copies of the Quran disseminated throughout the Middle Ages and into the modern period?
They were always kept in the whatever was the major city of that empire. So it tended to be either Cairo or Istanbul. Before that, it was Baghdad. So in Baghdad, in Cairo, in Istanbul is where they were kept. Now, during the colonial period, many of them were destroyed, not by the colonialists, but destroyed by Muslims themselves. And so what happened during the Ottoman Empire, the Ottomans who lived in Turkey collected them all and brought them up to Turkey and kept them in Turkey. Since that time,
all of the Qurans were kept in a central location. They weren't spread out.
No, the earliest ones. Of course, there are thousands of Qurans that are printed every year all over the world.
Well, with the advent of printing, that changed. So, okay.
I do want to, we're running over. I do want to mention that we just had a question come in from Musti. Do you know how Jesus died with proofs? And we're not going to be able to answer that today just because of time.
I can answer that in 2 seconds.
Okay, good.
Real quickly, you could just look at the historical evidence. Look at his death. His death was there. You can see that you had two scholars, Greek scholars, who were arguing this. They were arguing it in 52 AD. You have Tatian, who is a Roman scholar, who mentions not only the date that Jesus died, but also that happened under the auspices of Pilate, and also during the time of Tiberius. So that's how we know that it was in 33 AD. You have a Josephus, who is a Jewish scholar, who writes about the death of Jesus Christ. So there you have Greek, Roman, and Jewish scholars, all of them in the 1st and 2nd century, who are talking about the death of Jesus. I'm not even talking about the Christian scholars here.
And we have one more. Paul quotes a very early Christian creed, probably done by 38 AD, which would be within 5 years of the resurrection in 1 Corinthians 15, 1 through 4. Very early creed talking about the death and resurrection.
Did you mean Tacitus or Tacitus instead of Tatian? Because I think...
Sorry, Tacitus is the Roman one, and then it's Thales and Phlegon are the Greek ones. So Thales and Phlegon are 52 AD. Tacitus is 1st century, and then Josephus would be early 2nd century.
Right, and Christian creed, 38 AD, so you have very, very early history.
Carmen Christi. That's the Carmen Christi in Colossians 2, 6 through 11. Sorry, Philippians 2, 6 through 11.
Okay, but you also have 1 Corinthians 15, 1 through 4.
Oh, that's another one. Okay.
Right. Very important, because that he's citing there an early Christian creed. In fact, I'm trying to think.
Well, all the 4 Gospels have accounts of the crucifixion, so...
Whoever the caller is, ask the caller, when's the first historical reference that Jesus wasn't killed? When does that appear?
Okay,
historical reference or religious reference?
Well, religious would be much later, but I'm talking about historical. Since we're talking about history today, when's the first reference historically that Jesus did not die?
Probably in Islam.
Yeah. Well, right, and he may not be able to answer that because there's a little bit of a lag time between our asking, his typing, whatever, and we are now 8 minutes over, so we're going to do a wrap-up, but we are going to schedule you to come back.
Yes.
Because this is all very important stuff, and you're right, this is cutting edge. We want people to know about this. What website do they go to watch it in?
On YouTube, go to Fander Films or go to fander.uk.
Okay.
On the website is fander.uk.
Spell that again.
P-F-A-N-D-E-R. That's P-F-A-N-D-E-R.uk is our website. And the YouTube channel is Fander Films. P-F-A-N-D-E-R-F-I-L-M-S. Fander Films.
Okay. Dr. J. Smith, I am so glad you were on. I'll email you later today, and we'll start working on a future date. Ron, do you want to walk us out of here?
Yeah, why don't we do that? Okay, well, let's give credit where credit is due. Our resident cult leader profiler is Kneel Before Me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Our Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D Opposer. Our Mormon Archives Manager is polygamous. Our Liberal Bureau Chief Liberal Denominations Bureau Chief is Lucy Goosey. Transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys is Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yoleg Pulling. Our technical assistance comes advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Our grievance resolutions director is Yvonne Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is wiretapping, and our original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, who are both responsible for its content, but that will never be proven in a court of law.
Not a chance.
Not a chance.
Right.
So, glad to have you.
And now you know you've been had.
Yes.
Have me again. Have me again anytime.
We will.
Okay.
Adios.